there's not so much light here. I'm going to present some. Oh yeah, that's great.
Yeah, okay, so Critica Polityczna likes to welcome you to today's last lecture before the summer break in the cycle Poland for Beginners. Today with the question, Jews, the collective scapegoat of Polish transformation. And I'd like to welcome you, our today's lecturer, Michał Bilewicz, who's not only a member of Critica Polityczna, but also the director of the Institute for Research on Prejudice, and did already do some research on prejudice, stereotyping, and antisemitism as a whole. And before I like to hand the microphone over to you, I very warmly recommend this list to you, where you can write down your name and you will receive the newsletter from Critica Polityczna. And yeah, very glad that you're here. And after the lecture, I think we'll have a nice discussion.
Okay. Yeah, I think it works, yeah? Doesn't it? No. Does it work now? Yeah, I think it should work. Yeah, it does. Okay, so thanks for inviting me to speak here about the anti-Semitism in Poland after the transition, and really my view on anti-Semitism in Poland, which is the topic which you might have heard about if you're interested in current Poland, contemporary Poland, because usually these are things that people learn about Poland before even they come to Poland. The country has a severe problem with anti-Semitism, and my idea for this talk is to try to give you some explanation, or what are the factors that reinforce anti-Semitism in current Poland. So I'll start from something like from the very basics. So from the narrative which probably you get when you are in Poland. So whenever you come to Poland, you are probably told the history of the Polish transition. And in the history of Polish transition, there is one very essential moment, which is 1989, which is the collapse of the communism. And this is what we learn in schools. This is what we are telling outsiders, people who are visiting Poland. In 1989, the communist system collapsed, and people were protesting. The student movement, the workers' movement were protesting, and in the end, it led to a peaceful transition from communism to democracy, and from communist economy, from state-run economy to the free market economy. And this transition was made as part of the roundtable agreements, which is also this, which shows that actually it was very peaceful. Yes, that there were no really bad things happening, because the opposition and the government, the communist authorities sat into the table and negotiated the future state of Polish democracy and Polish economy. Now, what we remember from that times are some symbolic moments, like destruction of the Dzierżyński monument on the Bank Square in Warsaw. That was like very symbolic and very impressive, and showed the cutting point in 1989. This was the end of communism in Poland. But there is also the less, or the untold story of the collapse of communism in Poland. If you're in the Critica Polityczna, this is this alternative story is probably also, we are more aware of this alternative story, but in Poland, it's not really like, it's not really recognized, for example, in historical textbooks that the students use in their schools. So as part of systemic transition, we also had this very rapid transition into capitalism, which is very much linked to the name of Leszek Balcerowicz, the historical minister of finances, who developed rapid economic reforms. As part of these rapid economic reforms, so shifting to capitalism, to free market economy, much of Polish industry collapsed. So many factories were closed down, many people were unemployed, we had rapid inflation, we had very big problems with currency at the time, and we had actually an economic slowdown. So this beautiful story, this beautiful narrative of switching from communism to capitalism is not as beautiful if you look on the consequences, such as the fate of the workers, who of course then started protesting against this whole situation and change. And also, in the same time, we started witnessing a new phenomenon that didn't exist in Poland before, namely anti-Semitic incidents. So these are some examples. For example, so these are like anti-Semitic graffiti that you can see on the wall in several places. Sometimes on the monuments you see these kind of inscriptions with star of David hanged and Hitler good, you know. So someone writes it. Now the question, who writes it? Also these are pictures which you see pretty often in Poland. This is part of football hooliganism. So much of the football hooliganism and of the hooligans culture is in fact anti-Semitic. So for example, as part of the competition between LKS fans and Widzew fans of two football clubs in Łódź, the very heavily used symbol is related to the Holocaust. So they are blaming their enemies to be Jews. And here you can read "Śmierć Galbaty Nosa," death to the crooked noses, and a picture, and a very stereotypic picture, like from Sturmer in the Nazi propaganda, which was presented in Rzeszów, in one of the Polish southern cities. These incidents most often occur in places, in small towns, that suffered very much after the economic transition. So this is one of the explanations that we might have. The question which I would like to ask, and which I would like to answer in this talk, is why did we witness such so many expressions of anti-Semitism after 1989 that we didn't see before? And you can have three alternative theories why is it like that. First of them can be based on the concept of realistic group conflict. After 1989, the new issue emerged, the issue of material restitution. So the problem of the real estate, for example, which historically belonged to Jewish inhabitants. The same is true about the properties that belong to Polish owners, that they started to regain back their property. And this created tensions between those people, so the historical owners, and the people who lived in these places who were given apartments, houses in the communist times. And of course, to justify this competition over material resources, a conflict could emerge, and anti-Semitism, this offspring of this big explosion of anti-Semitism could be a justification of this problem. People are afraid of their properties being taken by someone, so they justify the fear by becoming anti-Semitic. The second explanation is related to the freedom of speech. So until 1989, we had censorship in Poland. So you couldn't really be openly so anti-Semitic. And then after 1989, of course, we had free democratic elections. And in free democratic elections, you could have, of course, as part of the freedom of speech, also the anti-Semitic parties like PFON or other parties that emerged after 1989 expressed openly their anti-Semitism. So with freedom of speech, this is a kind of cost of the freedom of speech. And the third explanation, which I'm going to focus on now in whole of this presentation, is one which deals with relative deprivation. So people who are deprived look for some explanation why this happened to me. If I'm losing job, if I become unemployed, I'm trying to find some explanation of that. And this was, so this is something which for me is probably one of the very important explaining factors of anti-Semitism in Poland. This is a model that was developed by Peter Blake, which is one of important social psychological thinkers who tried to understand why was there so much anti-Semitism in Weimar Republic, and why did Hitler got into power based on his anti-Semitic propaganda. So Glick says that the scapegoat, the need for scapegoat, is particularly strong in times when a group shares some frustrating conditions. So if I feel I'm losing my job, I'm losing my savings because the currency, the currency becomes, my currency collapses as part of this economic transition, and I lose my savings, yes? And then also I get unemployed. So this is a shared frustration. This creates a state of motivational arousal in which people have heightened need of causal analysis, yes? They need to find some reasons. Why did it happen to me? Now, the reasons are very complex because it's economy, and economy is never so comprehensible to people. So what happened then is people are looking for ideologies that can define, that can give answers, why does it happen to me? And the ideologies can be based on prior stereotypes. So the stereotypes can define some groups that are considered to be responsible, particularly groups that are perceived historically as very strong, very powerful, and having very negative intentions toward us. So if there is such a stereotype, which is combined with an ideology, and the ideology somehow, if the ideology works in a certain context, in the context of heightened need for causal explanation, people become more committed to this ideology, and then they are finding the scapegoat. When they find the scapegoat, they're usually, this leads to action, this leads to ideologically motivated aggression. So they aggress upon the scapegoat. So they're told, okay, Jews are responsible for your faith, and now if I can attack them, if I can harm them, then this arousal is decreased. Yes, then I'm better. And of course, this exaggerates the stereotype. It reinforces the stereotype, and then there is this vicious cycle which might be never-ending, as in Nazi Germany, as long as we don't destroy them. So this is a model which probably works also well in case of Poland. I will show you some insights from different methods that we use to capture this phenomenon. First of them will be the analysis based on archival survey research. Let's look in the history of opinion polls and surveys in Poland in which attitudes towards different ethnic groups were measured. So the analysis which I will show is based on more than 100 separate survey studies. Each of these studies was made on nationwide big representative sample of 1,000 people. So it's really a lot of data. And now this is what we find there. So on this graph, you see, so the higher the point is, the more positive is the attitude towards a certain ethnic or national group. The lower the point is, the more negative are the attitudes. Okay? So these are studies in which the question was asked, do you like or do you dislike a given ethnic group? And you see the data comes from different time points, and you can see how this changes in time. We did some standardization procedures based on this data to be able to write this, to show you this dynamics. So the line which is here, the red line on the bottom, these are Gypsy Roma. And you can see that attitudes toward Gypsy Roma, starting from 1989, Poles had the most negative attitudes towards Gypsy Roma. Yes, in all surveys that were conducted in Poland, Roma are the most hated group. But then Jews, which is this black one, the Jews are also one of the most disliked groups, together with Russians. Yes, Jews and Russians are here somewhere close to each other. Then Germans, of course, before 1989, Germans were hated as part also of the official propaganda. And then after 1989, you can see that the image of Germans completely changed. And it goes up to the kind of 0 point of neutrality. So basically, Germans from being the underdog Polish attitudes, they kind of become one of the more liked groups, together with Americans and together with French people. Now, I want you to focus on this one line of this attitude toward Jews, because you might hear that generally Poles become more tolerant towards Jews, and if you look at this line, it doesn't seem to be so much like that. Of course, you can see some improvement here, because here it starts from 1975, so it starts from the time when after 1968, attitudes toward Jews were the most negative in Poland. Yes, the official propaganda was against Jews pretty much. So you can see here that in that time, people expressed more negative attitudes towards Jewish people. Then it slightly improves, but then actually after 1989, it more or less stays on the same level. And another process which changes in time, which I want you to keep in mind, is the dynamics of Polish economy. This is the percent change in gross domestic product at constant prices. If you look on this dynamics of this economic indicator after 1989, there are two crucial important moments. First of them is after 1989, and the second is years 2001, 2002. First, these are the two economic crises which we had in Poland after economic transition. Because if you look generally on the dynamics of GDP in Poland, it goes up. Sometimes more slowly, sometimes faster, but it generally goes up. But what people really feel is the dynamics which is better observed by the percent change in gross domestic product at constant prices. And this is what really people felt. After 1989, the economy simply collapsed. And this was the time when they really needed some explanation. Why is it so? And also, we had a second collapse around the year 2000-2001, which was a reflection. Do you remember what was the big economic reason for slowdown in the year 2000 worldwide? Yeah, there was the dot-com, yeah, the dot-com issue, and Enron was actually at the same time, but this was generally big economic slowdown globally. There's some, just wondering how to deal with this. Okay. Like that. Okay. So, if you look on the dynamics of anti-Semitism after 1989, you can see that. So this is just extracted this one line from the surveys, yes, from this survey comparison that I showed you. On that line, you can see two crucial moments. First of them is here. Right after 1989, you have the attitudes toward Jews become more negative, yes? They become, from 1970s, they become more and more positive, and suddenly, after 1989, they become more negative. Then they become, again, more and more positive. So Polish people like Jews more and more, and then later on, around the year 2000, 2001, also there is this drop in attitudes, which then become more positive. So these are the two same moments of time that you could see on the economic dynamics. Although this is just a co-occurrence, yes, it doesn't tell us too much. Because there were other things. For example, around this year, one book by Jan Tomasz Gross, The Neighbors, I don't know how many of you are aware of the book. Yeah, everybody, that's good. Was published, which raised a lot of debate and discussion. So this was the time when it was heavily debated. Maybe people reacted defensively to that book, and this led to the deterioration of attitudes. But there are also other evidence showing that there is some problem. So I want to show you some Google search analysis. Which is something that everybody in this room could do on your own, if you would like to. You can look what was the dynamic of people's searches on the internet. How often did people search in different time periods for different topics? And in this case, we wanted to see whether there is a conceptual connection between the concept of prices and Jews. Is it really so that if people are more interested in crisis and they want to learn more about the crisis, what they will do automatically, they will search more for Jews. Yeah? So this is the kind of data that we gathered. So these are the terms that appeared in their searches. So like kryzys gospodarczy, kryzys Polski, so the different crisis terms and the Jew terms. And now what comes from it is the dynamics. So the blue line represents how often in a given week people were searching for the term crisis. And the red line represents how often did people search at that certain week for Jews or Jew. And this was astonishing for us because we never saw something like that. I mean, we compared it to, we checked for crisis and Germans, unrelated lines. Crisis and French, unrelated lines. Crisis Russians, unrelated lines. But here, for crisis and Jews, we clearly see that exactly in the same moments when people were looking more for crisis, they were looking more for Jews. Except at one period, which is 2009. In 2009, the crisis really came. Crisis came, and people started Googling for crisis, of course, much more, and not so much for Jews. And probably this is, I mean, if they started Googling so much for Jews as for crisis in that time, I would assume that probably there would be a pogrom or something, because that it means that they really are somehow, considering Jews to be responsible for this global crisis at the time. But still, the connection is there. The connection between the concepts. Compare it to Ukraine. Yeah, if you look for how often people in Ukraine search for crisis and Jews, okay, it's very, very low, so it doesn't really indicate too much because we took both terms, Żyd and Hebrew, so the more correct and the less correct version of a term used to describe Jews, they are basically unrelated in Ukraine. Now, finally, okay, this was not really an evidence, what I showed you. These were like insights. Now I want to show you some real empirical evidence that we got from the surveys that we made on our own in my research center. So, in first of them, I want to show you the scale of antisemitism, which we use in our studies. Okay, so when we study antisemitism, we often find three main components of it, three main phenomena behind it. When we are doing, this is a scale that we use to measure antisemitism in Poland. So we are asking people, to what extent do they agree with these sentences? And when we ask them, we are then using factor analysis. And the factor analysis can allow us to get like distinctive components of this. And these components are very clear. There are three of them. In all studies that we did, there were three distinctive components. First is traditional antisemitism, perceiving Jews as responsible for the death of Jesus, and believe in a blood libel. Believe that Jews are using Christian blood for ritual purposes. The second component is belief in Jewish conspiracy. Belief in Jewish conspiracy, these are people who think that Jews would like to rule the world, that Jews would like to control international institutions, but I guess that all of you would like to control international institutions and would like to rule the world. This is normal. Yeah? It's probably very general. But what is so specific about the perception of Jews is that Jews are perceived as trying to do that in hiding. Yes, Jews often meet in hiding to discuss their plans. Jews act in a secret way. Jews achieve their collective goals by secret agreements. So people who believe that Jews are trying to control the world, they also believe, so this is one component. So basically, statistically, it means that if someone agrees with this statement, the same person would agree with this and this and this statement. So these are people who basically believe in Jewish conspiracy. And the last component of anti-Semitism, which we observed in Poland, is something that we took from our German colleagues. And this is secondary antisemitism. Secondary antisemitism is a kind of antisemitism which you can express in a cultural, enlightened atmosphere of the evening party. You go to your friends and talk about politics, and you can say that Jews wanted to receive reparations from Poles for what Germans did to them. or just spread the stereotype of Polish anti-Semitism, or these are Jews who are abusing our feelings of guilt. So this is a kind of antisemitism which is a kind of politically correct antisemitism, which is very much related. So these are people who don't want to talk about the Holocaust anymore. These are people who don't want to talk about antisemitism anymore, who kind of deny the whole problem of antisemitism. And we find such people in Poland as well. So the fact that these are three different components, it means that people who believe in Jewish conspiracy are not necessarily people who at the same time believe in traditional anti-Semitism. Yeah? People who are traditionally anti-Semitic, they don't often, they don't necessarily believe in that. So those are three distinctive phenomena. Maybe I'll grab some switching device. Mogę sobie zrobić ten, przepraszam, bo jest... It's a good therapy, actually. Somebody's depressed. Okay. Okay. So I'll give us only some statistics today. And for those of you who do not have experience with statistics, I just want you to focus on the stars. So the numbers with stars indicate significant predictors. So if there is a star somewhere, it means that this variable is related to another variable. So in this case, first of all, we wanted to see what are the reasons of traditional anti-Semitism. And we checked for three of them. First is right-wing authoritarianism, right-wing authoritarian ideology. It's highly correlated, it's highly related to traditional. So people who are more right-wing, who more believe, who want strong authority, strong law, and so on, they would be more traditionally anti-Semitic. The second was relative deprivation. These were questions like, do you think that your material situation is now worse than it was in the past? Do you think that other people are doing better than you? Yeah, that other people's situation is better than your situation? Is your situation worse than other people's? And victimhood is the sense of competition of victimhood. We were more victimized than other nations were. We suffered more during the war, we suffered more during the Holocaust than Jews, for example. Yeah? So you can see that these two are unrelated to traditional anti-Semitism. Only right-wing authoritarianism is related. But when it comes to more modern forms of anti-Semitism, like secondary anti-Semitism, here you see that all three are connected to it. And we see now that people who suffer from deprivation, as people whose economic situation is deteriorating, they become more anti-Semitic. It is particularly visible for the belief in Jewish conspiracy. For the belief in Jewish conspiracy, this is what we are most interested in. Here, people who are deprived, whose economic situation is worsening, and who feel that their economic situation is worsening, they will be more believing in Jewish conspiracy, because the Jewish conspiracy belief is a good explanation. It gives them very simple explanation for their economic situation. In another study that we did with Ireneusz Krzemiński already 5 years ago, I mean, the study was actually done much earlier, more than 10 years ago, but we published it at that time. We basically, I mean, if you don't really think about the rest, but here is the main chain of causality. So people who suffer from deprivation, people whose economic situation is deteriorating, they start believing in Jewish conspiracy. Yes, for them, the Jewish conspiracy becomes a good explanation. Once they learn once they start believing in the Jewish conspiracy, it leads to discrimination. They are more supporting for the discriminatory policies toward Jews. Yes, for example, we were asking them, would you accept a Jewish person? Do you think that it should be allowed for a person of Jewish origin to buy land in Poland? Do you think that a Jewish person should be allowed to establish a company in Poland? And we had 50% of people who said no. Jewish people should not buy land in Poland. And now these people who would support such discriminatory policy, these are actually, they're driven by this chain. Yes, they're driven by the fact that their situation is bad, they want to have some explanation of that, they get the explanation, which is Jews are responsible for what happened to you, and then they would say, okay, if they are, then let's limit their chances. Let's discriminate against them. In the final study we would like to present you today, we looked on the two components of that. First is called, we psychologists call first anomie, and second alienation. So anomie is the basically lack of understanding of the political environment. So what happened after 1989 is that politics suddenly became very complex. It was not us and them, we good people, they bad government. Now it became very complex. And many people felt lost in this reality. So we ask such questions as, do you agree with the statement that now it is impossible to understand the sense of government's action? So these are people who basically lose cognitive control over their environment. The second one is not cognitive control, so it's not uncertainty about the reality, but it's rather uncontrollability. So this is the sense of like behavioral control. So people like me have no control over government's action. My will is not represented in the government. Okay, so I have no control over the government. And we wanted to see whether alienation and anomie are related to antisemitism. How? Still.
Nie mamy coś takiego.
A bateria nie będzie działała, jak to odłączymy? Czy padnie?
You can do it with a pencil. One pencil.
Yeah, if it's no, wooden would be bad, but no, wooden would be good actually. If, it's not.
Wooden.
Ah, maybe it's always me. With me is the problem. Yeah.
Wooden.
Okay. So what we did a model which was pretty nice because we were allowed to do a study in a longitudinal manner. So we approached a big sample, representative sample of participants twice in time. Yes, there was like a half-year gap between the two measurements. So in the same people, we measured anomie, antisemitism, and alienation, and then we measured again anomie, antisemitism, and alienation. And we wanted to see what predicts what. So now, the only important chain that we find here is actually that one. Alienation in time 1 leads to antisemitism in time 2, okay? As there is a passing of time, we can really show what's the cause and what's the consequence, yes? This way it's much better than doing just one survey. So, nothing like that works with anomie. So it's not about people losing, let's say, cognitive control. So people losing. It's not that people become uncertain about the politics and someone tells them, you know, Jews rule the world. If they tell them Jews rule the world, that's a good explanation. I know more about reality. It doesn't work like that. It's about the loss of their control over politics. So it's rather that they start thinking, I have no power. I cannot affect the decisions that are being made. And this breeds anti-Semitism. Now, there are a few myths that I would like to tell you about anti-Semitism in Poland. First of them is that anti-Semitism is basically disappearing. There's no more anti-Semitism. So, if you look at it, these are the results of the studies that we did in 2013 and in 2009, and we wanted to check where people still believe in traditionally anti-Semitic beliefs. And this is the map of Poland, which shows you that although you don't see so much traditional anti-Semitism in the more developed part of Poland, but you still see that in the southeast of Poland, Lublin area, Podkarpackie. In the southeast of Poland, you still can find people who blame Jews for killing, blame contemporary Jews for killing Jesus. Secondary anti-Semitism is probably more spread in the society, but the red areas also are somewhere in the south and east. Yes, Lubelski again is one of the areas where the extent of secondary anti-Semitism is the highest. And finally, believe in Jewish conspiracy. Here the map is very clear. The lowest levels are here, so the south and east of Poland. So the highest are here, and the lowest are on the north in the areas which actually were never heavily populated by Jews, because these were areas that were taken from Germany, and they had Jewish populations of approximately 1%. So, and here the population of Jews in some of the towns was 60–70%. So this is very tragic situation because you see that most anti-Semites live actually in these areas. Where do you find most of the remnants of the Jewish culture, like synagogues, abandoned cemeteries? They are here. And the question is who will take care of them? The people who are there. And this is why it's an important issue, how to make these people more interested in the Jewish history and Jewish culture and less anti-Semitic, to take care of the Jewish heritage of their town, which is their own heritage actually, but they don't acknowledge it that way. So this is something I will not talk today about, but we do a lot of efforts to change people's thinking in this part of Poland, by education, for example. This is the evolution of anti-Semitism in Poland. How did anti-Semitism change in time? This is a comparison of the two surveys that we did in 2009 and 2013, and we asked exactly the questions about these three forms of anti-Semitism. The secondary anti-Semitism, no change at all. Conspiracy anti-Semitism, no change at all. The only change that we observed was the paradoxical increase of traditional anti-Semitism. Why paradoxical? Because in 2009, these were mostly old people living in the suburbs, in the areas of Poland that were very, depopulating. So most people from these areas of Poland were migrating. So we expected the traditional anti-Semitism will be gone in a few years. Now we studied in 2013 and we find, wow, there's an increase in traditional anti-Semitism. This surprised us, and we wanted to explain that. So we said, oh, why is it so? Probably because of the church, probably because of the religion. People become more religious, so they will be more anti-Semitic. But then if you look at the measures of religiosity or of church attendance, no significant difference. So it cannot be really explained by religiosity. So in general, when you think about the relations between Polish church and Jews, it's quite complex. Because from one side, you have Pope John Paul II, who is still a very big, people are considering him a very big, charismatic figure. An important part of Polish identity is actually related to this papal tradition. And he was preaching about the Christian-Jewish dialogue. Yes, he was the one to enter the synagogue in Rome and to visit Jerusalem and to have a very to put the whole Christian-Jewish dialogue into agenda of the Catholic Church. So Poles try to follow him, but also Poles have another personality, Tadeusz Rydzyk, the head of Radio Maria, who is. Yeah, he is a prejudiced personality, and his radio was very effective in creating the conspiracy stereotypes about Jews in Poland and maintaining them. And he's a director of the main Catholic radio in this country. Now, these are two kinds of religiosity, and in one study we measured it, and we looked on how people who are differently framing their religiosity. Are they more thinking about their religion in this way, or are they more thinking about their religion in this way? How do they relate to Jews? What is their level of anti-Semitism? So you can see that for people who think in this more exclusivist way about their religion, so who are more similar to Rydzyk's religiosity, for them, the more religious they get, the higher is their anti-Semitism. For people whose sense of religiosity is inclusive, so who think, we are Christian, but we should take care of other religions, and we should also consider other religious groups as our allies in the fight with the secularization, for example. Yes, so they can be very strictly religious, but they're religious in a more inclusivist way. For them, actually, the relation was the opposite. So the more religious a person gets, in this kind, the less anti-Semitic the person is. So this is why we see zero effect. So religiosity in most studies is not really related with anti-Semitism. If you look at the data carefully, you don't see a very big correlation between religiosity and anti-Semitism. Why? Because people can be religious in two different ways. For some people, religiosity actually decreases anti-Semitism. The second myth, yeah.
I have a question. We missed the beginning, but I would like to know more about the definition of anti-Semitism. Do you include anti-Zionism there in your definition?
No.
No?
No, I don't include it there. In the works on anti-Semitism we are looking on three main components. Believing Jewish conspiracy. The second is traditional anti-Semitism, so religious one. This was the term coined by Helena Daphne, who studied this topic, and these are people who are blaming Jews for killing Jesus. These are people who believe in blood libel sometimes. And the third one is secondary anti-Semitism. These are people who are actually blaming Jews for anti-Semitism, who say the Jews are responsible for what happens to them. The Jews are abusing guilt and so on. So like Holocaust industry myth by Finkelstein. Yeah. Now I want to tell you exactly now about the anti-Zionism, because this is an issue by itself. The myth is that Poles are supporting Israel. Whenever you talk to people, if you go to the meeting with Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or if you meet some diplomats, they will tell you Poland is the biggest ally of Israel in Europe, which is probably true. Our prime ministers, presidents are often visiting Israel and expressing there's a lot of very good relationships between the two countries. Frankly speaking, all governments in Poland, starting from Christian democratic, left-wing, social democratic, liberal, up to nationalist governments that we had, all of them were supportive to Israel in the conflict in the Middle East. They were very, very clear in their support to Israel. So this is something which was always presented in Polish politics. The whole thing started already in 1967. During the Six Days War, Polish authorities at the time, the communist authorities, the same as the Soviets, supported Arab states. Now, Polish society was pretty much against the authorities at that time, so people were joking like, our Jews beat their Arabs. They had a kind of Schadenfreude, having satisfaction from the fact that our local Jews from Poland are going there and they're winning with the Soviet armies. So now we have this narrative that we were always on the side of Israel. But now it's not really true. If you look on the studies in which people were asked about their attitudes toward Israel, are they positive or negative? You can see that the positive one, in 1980s, people clearly express more negative attitudes towards Israel than positive ones. In 1988, rather negative, less positive. In 1990, still 31% expressed negative attitude and only 25% expressed positive attitudes. And the rest have no opinion. Yeah? And now we have slight prevalence of positive over negative. Most people now you see are clearly neutral, they have no opinion about the thing. So there's slightly more positive than negative, but if you compare that to French, to attitudes that people have about French people, or about France, or about Britain, they would be clearly positive about Britain. About Israel, it's mixed. Now, where are the sympathies? Are the sympathies of people on the side of Israelis or more on the side of Palestinians? These questions were also asked in several survey studies. So in 1973, you can see that most people declared that they sympathize with, almost half of people would declare that they sympathize with Palestinians, only 3% sympathize with Israel. And then still in 2007, there are more people who support Palestinians or Arabs than those who support Israelis.
How relevant are those statistics from the communist times?
Exactly.
Given that they were from communist times, yes, you mentioned our Jews as well.
Yeah,
So
to say what they were thinking.
You're absolutely right. In the communist, so this is why we should look a little bit carefully from the data that comes from before 1989 and particularly from, let's say, 1970s. That's even before 1974, so yeah, this was really times when generally freedom of speech was very constrained in Poland. And and even one of the polling agencies of the time was a military agency. Yeah? So there was a soldier actually who was a pollster on the time. So people were really afraid of expressing their attitudes. So let's say from the communist times, let's get rid of that. And let's say, okay, because here we cannot estimate what are really their attitudes or not. Some surveys from the communist times were, basically, even the communists very much relied on the surveys in their political decisions. So at least they, the communist authorities at the time, sometimes, for example, they made they made surveys that had a secret results. They didn't publicize the results. They only used it for internal purposes of the Communist Party, for example. So they trusted them. But now, of course, it's questionable. But from here, from 2002, 2005, and 2007, the tendency is clear, and the sympathies are pretty clear, more on the Palestinian than, Israeli side. This is done. Got it. Now, this is the most recent results of the most recent survey that we did on this topic, Polish Prejudice Survey, in which we asked two questions. One was, the Jews have rights to have their homeland in Israel. Do you agree with that? And you can see that there's more people who disagree with the statement than people who agree with that statement. And the most puzzling one is this one, because this is clearly anti-Semitic criticism of Israel. Because criticism of Israel is not necessarily anti-Semitic, yes? Because when you ask them about anti-Israeli attitudes, I don't think that people who are critical about Israel are anti-Semitic. You can criticize any country and the decisions of any country. It becomes anti-Semitic when you make comparisons like that. When you say, okay, these guys are Nazis. These guys are exactly doing what the Nazis did during the Holocaust. And here you can see that more people agree with such comparison than disagree with such comparison. Yes? 3 is the middle point of the scale. So a lot of people are trying not to respond to the question, but those who kind of respond, there's more people on the right-hand side, there's only 25% who disagree with such comparison. Yeah.
I have a question regarding this statistic, because Western media, actually, especially in the United States, have been actually talking about how much American Jews are ever less agreeing with the policies of Israel. So there is kind of a global shift that we haven't seen, and I think the cooling of relations between America and Israel is a sign of that. And I'd just be curious to see how maybe, whether this question could be rephrased and seen in an American context over some time, how this could be changing, especially that American Jews are becoming ever more critical.
There are studies like that in the States. For this question, this was actually the question that we wanted to have here, because we found it clearly anti-Semitic. And we want to have a study of anti-Semitism, not generally relations with Israel. I find it very problematic that sometimes in these surveys in the States, they're organized by, some of them by Jewish institutions, all criticism of Israel is considered to be anti-Semitic. And the same in Western Europe. So, but basically, the process is not really visible in Poland, because if you compare the questions that are repeated, like this one, you see that this, this is pretty much a stable thing. Yes, from across 2002 to 2007, we probably now could find more results of the questions which was phrased that way. I don't think there's much change. Now, the last myth that I would like to face today is the myth that after 1989, Poles gained knowledge about the Holocaust and reconciled with the so-called dark chapters of our history. And I've heard that many of you have heard about the Jedwabny crime, yes, and the Jan Tomasz Plus cross book, but this was not the only book. There were much more books like that. And later on, so Jan Tomasz Plus started from The Neighbors, then he wrote another book, Fear, about pogroms after the Second World War, And another one, Golden Harvest, which was about looting of Jewish property during the Holocaust. But he wasn't the only one. There were other authors like Jan Grabowski, who's writing about crimes committed on Jews during the war. There was an important debate that we had back in the 1980s about Polish passivity. Yes, about Poles as being passive bystanders during the Holocaust and not really helping Jews and being disinterested during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. We had several films about the Holocaust. So after 1989, the topic was really covered a lot in Poland. But now this is a graph that is very upsetting, because it shows how scarce is the knowledge about the Holocaust in Poland. In several studies, and these are not studies conducted by us, but this is studies we took the results of the studies of the nationwide studies conducted by different Polish agencies. We took them together and reanalyzed them. So starting from 1992, early after the systemic transition, 1996, 2002, and 2010. The question was asked, do you think who suffered more during the Second World War and during the Nazi occupation of Poland? Jews, Poles, or both nations the same? The black bars represent people who think that Jews suffered more than Poles. 46% of Poles surveyed in 1992 said Jews suffered more. And you see that there is a linear decrease. Already in 1996, there's 39, 38%, and now in 2010, there is only 28% of people who say the Jews suffered more during the war. Now, the gray bar are people who think that Poles suffered more than Jews during the Second World War. And this bar is also increasing in a linear way, and there are more than 15% of people who think that Poles suffered more. Now, the most commonly chosen option is both nations the same. So these are probably people who have completely no understanding of what happened during the war. What would be your explanation for that? Why is it so? Yeah.
I don't know, right away, maybe this is to do with because of Stalin's policies of collective suffering, which were propagated during the communist era. But what would be more interesting that maybe this is decreasing and Polish elements are going up because there's becoming more of a nuanced view that there was also different crimes. So it's, I don't know, it's very interesting when we look at this, I guess, historical progression of communist policies.
Yeah. Although then I would expect this white bar to be highest in the 1992, because it was freshly after the communism. I remember going to Belgium or to Treblinka and seeing that, you go to Treblinka, you see back in the early 1990s, you still had the communist flags, and on that with the list of the nation, list of ethnicities. These are the ethnic groups that suffered in this death camp, starting from A, Albanians, ending with Żydzi, Jews. Yeah. So the list was in alphabetical order, because the Jewish suffering in the communist time was not acknowledged. Jews were one of the ethnicities. It was not specific anyhow. So
it's maybe more political. It's nicer to say we are the same, we both suffer as much.
It's nicer. Maybe it's nicer, but it basically shows that you have no knowledge and you kind of project, okay, I have a positive attitude, so I'm, let's say we're friends, yeah? Maybe it's like that. My understanding of this pattern is the demography. In 1992, yeah?
Yeah, because in my opinion, this growing number of people who think that Poles suffered more, it's our very, I would say, Polish version of Holocaust lie.
Of Holocaust?
Lie.
Like
denying Holocaust.
Denial. Yeah, I think it might be also a consequence of education. Because if you read historical textbooks, all Polish people are righteous. It's all about Polish suffering, and then the Holocaust is covered like that. Okay, there were Jews who were killed in camps, but Polish people were rescuing them. So if this is what you learn at school, that Polish people were only rescuing, then your impression is that the fate of Jews was not so bad, yeah? and the Polish hero was really good. Then there is some bias which probably can be linked. We did one analysis like that, which surprised us very much. That the more hours a person had, there was a study of high school students. The more hours were devoted to the Holocaust during classroom, the more negative attitude a person had toward Jews. So the Holocaust education was not translating into more positive attitudes toward Jews. What was more, we also analyzed some biases in the knowledge, and we found that people who had more Holocaust taught at school were more biased in the historical knowledge. For example, they more overestimated the size of Polish help offered to Jews during the war. So the Holocaust education in Poland just doesn't work. It's done in a very bad way, basically. But my explanation of this, so there is no education which could, increase the knowledge. But the decrease of the knowledge can be explained by the demography. In 1992, you still had old people. Big part of this representative sample were people who lived in Poland during the Nazi occupation of Poland. Those people, they were very anti-Semitic. We did analysis on that, and the older people were more anti-Semitic than the younger people. But one thing they were absolutely confident about: Jews were the victims of the Holocaust. They could be anti-Semitic, but the truth was the truth because they remembered it. Now, the vividness of this history is not so great anymore. So this knowledge is a knowledge which is transmitted by parents, grandparents. So now in the sample from 2010, and even more in the samples from 2013, the last ones that we had, there's very rare people who remember the Holocaust. So these are people who don't have personal memories. So to summarize, I wanted to present you the kind of explanation of the anti-Semitism in Poland as being caused by some economic difficulties that people had. And people had necessarily, they really needed some explanation for the difficult fate that they had. And who came? The politicians who offered this explanation. And those politicians who offered them explanations were often winning elections, just because they were giving simple explanations about the conspiracy. Talking about Jews, they were just mentioning, oh, there is a conspiracy of Gazeta Wyborcza, or there is a conspiracy of someone, just pointing to some individual. And not even saying that she's Jewish, but the name was sounding Jewish. And this was enough to win the elections. And even the most recent elections, which all of you probably witnessed a few days ago, gave a very symbolic evidence of that. Paweł Kukiz, who is a rock superstar, he ran for he ran in the presidential election. He got 20% of votes, so this was the third best, he scored the third in the whole elections. Among young people, particularly among young people, in people of age under 29, so people who are younger than 29, among them 41% voted for Kukiz. So he absolutely won among the youngest cohort. And this person, for example, a few years ago, when his songs were not played in Polish radio, in Polish private radios, what he said? He said, it looks like it is Michnik and Blumstein who are currently editing playlists in commercial radios, such as RMF and SK. Now, this statement is not anti-Semitic if you look on the first glance. But then if you ask yourself on the second, why did he choose Michnik and Blumstein? Michnik is an editor of Gazeta Wyborcza, of a newspaper. Is he dealing with radio? Not really much. But his name is a Jewish name. Yeah? Blumstein is the editor in Gazeta Wyborcza, in this daily. He is a retired editor of Gazeta Stołeczna, so of the local newspaper in Warsaw. What does he have to do with a Krakow-based radio RMF or radio SK? But it gives you a sense of conspiracy. There is something going on. People are against me. People are against me. Why they are against me? Because the two Jewish journalists are around, and they are probably responsible for my fate. So I wanted to finish with this beautiful evidence of how strong the conspiracy myth is and how effective it can get in political propaganda today. So I thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing questions and discussion.
Presented kind of in a way as if this phenomenon appeared out of the blue after 1989, and it existed before, it existed years before, it existed in the 80s. It was a topic in 1980s, and the government as well. It sometimes did the anti-Semitic things, like 68. In 1980s, it was actually playing the field card against the solidarity anti-Semitism. So also it's not like as if 1989 is some turning point. It's the turning point for what's visible because of the democracy. But I'm not convinced it's the turning point for what's actually happening under the surface.
You're probably right that it made it more visible, and but there were also factors after 1989 that reinforced it, that made it not only visible but very much present. As the people, I mean, I hope to convince you that at least part of that is motivated by the difficult situations that people had. The question is, like in the model of Peter that I showed you, was that the situation of disadvantage, the situation of deprivation. In this situation, you're looking for explanation. Why does it happen to me? Now you need to have some knowledge that defines Jews as being responsible for that. These can be politicians who come and tell you these are Jews who are responsible for that. And also, the things were present before. Yes, you had Grunwald, Patriotic Alliance, which was a legal anti-Semitic group in the communist times. You mentioned 1968, which was an anti-Semitic purge in the Communist Party organized, and generally anti-Semitic events organized by the party itself. So it existed, yeah. It existed in the communist times, that's obvious. But I don't have any data from that time, but I also think that this was also a way to deal with different crises in that time. And I really believe in this economic model of anti-Semitism. So even in the pre-war Poland, I think it seems that much of anti-Semitism was motivated by the interest of Poles who were moving from the villages, moving to the towns because of economic crisis. They had to leave the village, they had to move to the town, and they wanted to get into the market, to become craftsmen, for example, to become merchants. And these jobs were traditionally, historically, these were Jewish jobs. So there was a competition there, and they wanted to justify their actions in this competition, and they wanted to discriminate against Jews in order to build themselves their better economic future. So I really think that a lot of pre-war anti-Semitism, the biggest pogrom happened in such small towns. Even Lithuania is such a small town, which was, all craftsmen and merchants before were Jewish. And only back in the 1920s, Poles start coming to the town, and they start doing these jobs that were before Jewish jobs. And the competition starts, and they need some good, justification of their hate toward it. So the anti-Semitism comes as the justification of the competition.
So in the light of this economic deprivation explanation, how would you explain the anti-Semitism among the North American Poles? Because they are certainly better off than the Poles in Poland. There are actually, I've seen statistics that they're on average better off than average American-born American. And still the anti-Semitic levels are like totally different scale that they are here. Actually, James Brown ended up second in Toronto out of the place with double-digit number. And I personally know many North American Poles which are doing very well economically. They have their big houses, they have their happy families and so on, and they're still anti-Semitic as hell.
Basically, there's a lot of, personally, I think they're jealous, simply, because there's a lot of competition between different immigrant groups in America, and there's a lot of studies of that. There's a lot of studies of, for example, black anti-Semitism among black people in America. Yes, Louis Farrakhan. You know, when the leaders of Black American movement, when they were fighting for their civil rights and fighting against racism, suddenly this movement became anti-Semitic. Yes, which is really strange. But it seems that the Jews are considered to be, there is this stereotype portraying Jews as the most successful ethnic minority in America. And I think it works both for Poles and both for blacks, that they consider Jews to be the most successful minority. They also came from the same part of Europe from which Polish people were originating, and their success is way much higher. Just compare, I mean, even the lobbying group, yes, the lobbying group of the Polonia in the States and the American Jewish Committee, for example. Compare the strengths of these lobbies in Washington. Poles are really bad in organizing the minority-based lobby compared to Armenians or Jews or other ethnic groups which have been much more successful in that. And I think it leads to jealousy. I mean, we are disorganized. We are really bad in fighting for our rights in Washington. And now, oh, they're doing better. So yeah. So it can be bred also by a sense of deprivation, because deprivation, you don't need to be extremely poor to be deprived. You can be deprived just by seeing that other people are doing better. So if you see, if you have this upward comparison, other people or other groups are doing better than you do, that's enough. Yes. When the revolutions start, not when the situation is the worst. The revolutions start in moments when people know that other groups have better, and that their situation is now getting worse than it was before. But it's not that or it was getting better, and it stopped going better. This is the J curve of relative deprivation, and then people get frustrated and so on. So it's not so objectively economic; it's rather linked to the subjective perception of the economic processes.
I would like to
Sorry.
Okay, I have two questions. First, Christopher Browning in his book,
So
very
I
good.
was going to answer
I'm answering the question. Yes.
to, yes, and I was also.
Great, just please use the microphone because
Yeah.
we record
I
the
didn't
session,
see
so.
there was another.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to speak about the issue of America, and it's not based on research, like I can show statistics, but I think that it's also based on the fact that there is a lot of prejudice against Polish people in America. And then there is, I think, the deprivation in America is less about money, less about property, but who has more control about what history is being taught, what museums are being opened. This is the same with black native taught Jews, because there is a Holocaust museum and there is no slavery museum. So I think, yes, the deprivation is the deprivation of rights on history, and the fact that there is prejudice and it's easy to blame it on Jews. I'm not going to enter if it's justified or not. And yes, I think because this is the place where you do have Poles and Jews, white years are almost no Jews, so this is why there is also stronger anti-Semitism.
Yeah. So
There is more conflict, actual conflict that is being created between groups.
So you think the problem, as I understand it correctly, is due to the fact of lack of acknowledgement of Polish history as compared to the acknowledgement of Jewish history.
I think it's also influences in Poland.
Yeah.
But I think it's very much influences in Poland, but I don't know how to settle this with a lot of the things that you talked about today, so I didn't. But in America, where you actually have those two groups in conflict and contact with each other, I think it's very relevant.
You're right, and I showed these correlations here, and there were significant correlations with the sense of victimhood competition. Yeah. So there is one aspect that I didn't talk much about: the sense of we were more victimized than they were, yeah? And the sense of who is the recognized victim. And we are now conducting some studies on that. Victimhood. If we feel victims, and we feel that our victimhood is not recognized, then we are in conflict with those groups whose victimhood is recognized. Yeah.
To the will to be recognized as more victimized than Jews or as victims of Jews is because of one of the largest reasons is lack of recognition. in what Poland went for what non-Jewish population went for.
Yeah.
So,
This,
and I think it needs to be a little bit more acknowledged.
yeah, it is part of the story. So when I showed you these correlations, these are not actually correlations but regressions. So I wanted to show that even if you rule out this victimhood thing, there is still something which is caused by deprivation. Yeah. So the deprivation is one of the explanations, and the big sense of victimhood or lack of acknowledgement is another one. None of them explains everything, which is the main thing which I would like to come as a result of this whole narrative. That there are several explanations of why people are anti-Semitic, and one of them that you said is perfectly true. The sense of not being sufficiently recognized.
No problem. I have two questions. Christopher Browning in his book Ordinary Men, Police Battalion 101, and along with very recently Wendy Lauer and Taylor Furies, both allude to the importance of external pressure, where simply the presence of authority could act as a catalyst to commit crimes. And when we talk about anti-Semitism, do you think that there is this element that we're in the Antisemitic group and we're coming through Poland, this kind of external pressure and the knowledge that these crimes could take place was a much more powerful incentive versus actually what was rooted in the historical context? And my second question is, you showed this demographic map where anti-Semitism exists, and I know, for example, because I did some research on this, as I am a graduate student, so I have done quite a bit of research. About the fact that because Belarusians and Ukrainians in the Crimea region were largely illiterate, it was Jews that were taken into the ranks of the Soviet Union after the invasion of Poland, and a lot of Poles became ever more influenced to believe in this Jewish, Soviet, Jewish communist conspiracy that was taking place. And this also seems to kind of resonate where this hardest feelings of anti-Semitism still pervade. So I don't know whether, how would you relate to this older generations in those regions, kind of?
Because I'll start from the last one, because it's I think it's really crucial, the history of this region, yeah? That these were the bloodlands, yeah? These were the area that was, and certain parts were invaded in 1939 by the Soviets, and then in 1941, Germans came in, and of course, the Germans organized all the violence around it in many places there. And many people just now justify the kind of violence that they witnessed or committed themselves during that period. The story about the Jewish collaboration in this area with the Soviets is a little bit exaggerated currently. I can tell you about one interesting issue about that. I did, when I was a student, back when I was a student, I did an analysis of a right-wing Catholic newspaper, in Poland. It was published in the 1930s. And I found in the 1930s that they were writing about Jews, about the Soviets, that they're afraid of the Soviets invading Poland. And they were writing the whole story. The Soviets are invading Poland, and the Jews will greet them with bread and salt, like the traditional Polish greeting, and they will build the entrance, like the entrance gate for the Soviets when they enter Poland. So they were writing these things already in the 1930s. The Jews will be the collaborators. Now, when you look at the memories of people in that region, all of them are telling you, okay, Soviets came in and Jews were greeting them with bread and salt and building the welcome gates. And then when you go to historical data, historical evidence, you find, for example, that in a group of people that was really greeting the Soviets, majority were ethnic Poles, and only minority were Jews. But people remembered Jews and forgot about Poles, because Jews were congruent with the stereotype which was formed already before the war. So if you're exposed to such a stereotype for a long time, and then you see an incident, from the incident you remember the things that are congruent with the stereotype. So this is why I think it's a lot of that is exaggerated, even in people's memory, even in the memory of people who are from these regions. Yes? But also, of course, there are other issues like of material compensation and material properties. Yes, I mean, some of these people live in Jewish houses. Yes? and they're afraid of the fact that they might be obliged to give them back. Or, the grounding, I'm not sure if I understood exactly the grounding question, because the 1-1 battalion book, the Ordinary Germans, no, the
Ordinary Man Reserve Battalion 101.
Yeah, Ordinary Man, because the Goldhagen wrote about the Germans, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the grounding book was not so heavily discussed in Poland. It was not a topic of, it's not that people know about this story. And I'm trying to teach it to my students, because I think it's a very powerful story, because it tells you how people behave when under some authorities. Yes, that it's not that there is the evil Germans, but the completely normal Germans, the normal policeman, when sent to such a situation, that there is this power of situation drives them to cruelty. And I think it's very, very true about any cruelty. So this is why I also say very similar things about cruelty committed by Poles toward Jews. Much of that was also caused by the situation in which they were put, in which they had power and Jews were deprived of any power. Or, this was a setting which was created not by them. And of course, I'm not trying to exonerate that. Yeah? It's not to exonerate, it's just to explain the whole situation.
First of all, thank you for your lecture. It's very interesting. I have more than a question. I have a reflection. Is whether you know something also about other countries in Europe and how they deal with the Holocaust. Because Poland is, of course, very representative, but for example, the Netherlands, they were not very much used. Okay, 115,000, not very much, but 95% of all of them were killed. So I saw some parallelism. For example, they also feel somehow guilty. That might be also the reason that the Netherlands is always pro-Israel in their foreign policy, which is also, I found there some parallelism. And I find also very interesting that when you analyze the topic of this topic, you look at economic situation, the privatization, and the previous concurrency between the local ethnic groups and the Jews. And so I just wonder whether you could tell something more about other European countries. Do you know something about that? Is there something to learn about that?
The stories of different countries is very different. There are some good comparisons of the antisemitism and prejudice in different parts of Europe and different countries. And as far as I remember, in most of these comparisons, Poland and Hungary are the countries where the antisemitism is the highest as compared to other European countries. Although these are surveys, yes, so it might also reflect just the openness and the culture and the fact that people are somehow constrained. They don't express the anti-Semitic views in some Western countries, and in Poland people generally express much more prejudice. So we don't know really whether there is a big difference, although the surveys are actually pointing to Poland and Hungary having the highest, the most prejudice against Jews. And there are, of course, different peculiarities of countries that have big Muslim immigrant groups, yes, and much of the anti-Semitic sentiments in France or in Britain are a result of the sympathies that Muslim populations living in this country might have to Palestinians suffering in Israel. Yeah? So this is completely different kind of form, a different reason and justification for anti-Semitism. And the history, of course, Poland had this very big, very large Jewish populations, which was, you didn't have any place in Europe where you had towns of 70 or 80% of Jewish population living in a town. So the situation in Germany was very different before, like in the 1920s, you had 1% of Jewish population in Germany. So it was sufficient for the Nazis to create the whole anti-Semitic ideology based on that, and those Jews lived predominantly in big cities, not in small towns. So So in Poland it was quite different because the conflict occurred mostly in the small towns, yes, between the small town population and Poles getting into the job markets in the small town. I'm not a historian, so that's a question probably should be asked to a historian.
My question is, what I found really interesting in your presentation, that you said about education, Holocaust, that it doesn't really work at schools, and we see the rise of support for Paweł Kukiz, for example. So what do you think should be done at schools in Poland to prevent what is happening right now?
So, first of all, there is a problem with civic education in schools generally, and students are really not learned how to express their economic interest and economic idea and political ideas. For example, we have a class of how many of you are graduated Polish schools? Yeah. Did you? Okay, I'm not sure when did you do that, but recently, if you did it quite recently, you had probably classes of entrepreneurship. Did you have one? Yeah. In Polish school now, it's common to have a class of entrepreneurship. Did you have a class of economy? Separate class? No. Yeah. This is very interesting. We don't have classes about economy. We don't have classes about trade unions, about
there is something like knowledge of society.
Knowledge of society, but it's a marginal issue. And we have whole course of entrepreneurship. How many people can be entrepreneurs? Most people will be workers, not workers, but will have jobs, but not be entrepreneurs. Yeah. So this is a kind of illusionary education in which we value a lot entrepreneurship and not really give people knowledge about their interests, which are also class interests. Yes. So I think that this is a result of young people being completely not aware of politics, because Paweł Kukiz in his campaign, he didn't have any positive program. What is his economic program? No one knows. What is his political program? He just wants to change the electoral system. But it's yeah. But I mean, Piłsudski in fact had a very good program. Like, he had not very good, but he had some program. These people, they're voting for a person who knows how to destroy the existing structures of power, but he doesn't tell anything about the positive program. So I think this is a very good evidence of the collapse of education system in Poland. That cannot just educate people who have some who can express their political needs and and look for political representation of their interests. They're not really looking for that, which is upsetting messaging.
But the facts about the Holocaust are well taught at school? Okay,
the facts are taught pretty correctly. Like the numbers, that's there. If you look on textbooks, you will see that the facts are there. The interpretation is biased. The sense of, for example, the history of blackmailers, of schmalzowniks, of people who are blackmailing Jews, it's not really taught at schools. The stories of rescuers is always taught. Although the number of rescuers was very small, as the number of rescuers is always small in all populations. If someone faints on the street, most people will pass by. Nobody will help. Yeah. So this is the illusion that young Polish people have that all Poles were rescuers. But it's absurd because they also know that they themselves will not help anyone, in such a situation. So this is very, very strange for me that the school creates an illusion about the Polish-Jewish relations during the war. No.
So maybe the answer is to recognize what happened in Vietnam, to teach about it, and also to teach about the bad parts of our history and what happened. Because I found it very interesting, like teaching about Holocaust is actually causing the bad things and leading to more antisemitism.
More ignorance, yeah, even more antisemitism. So I also think that just teaching about Jedwabne and teaching about crimes doesn't solve the problem. I think you also have to teach about the rescuers, but you have to teach about the rescuers as being unique. Not to make a balance. Some people were rescuers, some people were killing. But to tell how rare is heroic behavior, and if you tell them how rare it is, you know, then they discover how big was it, not how big, but how great was such behavior, how righteous was it. Yes, that the really righteous person is not a person who, you know, who's one of thousands that help. The righteous person is a person who has a neighbor who wants to kill him because he's rescuing Jews. Yes, and he still does that. So this is a good. So this for me would be a good message that could be conveyed at schools.
Okay. I would like to comment on that, like teaching on Jedwabne, because I think there are like two quite different issues that get mixed up. It's one on the one hand is knowledge and ignorance, and on the other are feelings. For example, antisemitism. I'm not a social scientist nor a psychologist, but so this is all based on the research. But from what I feel and from what I've seen of people, if they're shown the crimes, if the crimes as Jedwabne are pushed into them, they will try to find some guilt in the victims, because if our ancestors killed them, then they must have done something wrong to them. If they're shown the lessons of the rescuers, then they would probably be more positively look at Jews which were worth of rescuing. So I think one way, if you're solving the ignorance problem one way, we can actually end up increasing the problem of prejudice at the same time.
Yeah. I can tell you that I talked to a colleague of mine who's working on Holocaust education in Hungary. And I presented her our data about the Polish youngsters thinking that everybody was rescuing Jews. And she said, oh, you should be proud of yourself. You should be happy with the situation. Because at my home in Hungary, nobody would be so proud of rescuing Jews. People would say, no, we didn't rescue them because they are bad. Why we should actually rescue them? Yeah? So the impression, the image of the Holocaust in Hungary completely doesn't include this overestimation of rescuing. So you're right that it has some positive, it's still better, yes? It has some positive potential because it gives a message that rescuing Jews is something good. Yeah? But then when it's, you know, when you're told that everybody was rescuing, then it starts to become an alibi. Yeah? That it's not, you know, it's just defensive. We were all rescuing Jews, so it's impossible that we did anything bad. So it's just creating a structure that doesn't allow to gain any knowledge about any negative fact from the history.
I guess to comment what you have to say about Jedwabne and teaching it in schools, I think it's still a very problematic issue because I know, for example, in commentary made by Piotr Wróbel, quite a distinguished professor actually in the field of Polish-Jewish relations, who works at the University of Toronto, and he even talks about that there is a significant problem because Gross's essay, to a certain regard, is an opinion essay, and a lot of people sometimes take out elements of opinion which are used in terms of interpretation, and that, I guess, demonstrating that even at the highest echelons of scholarship, this is still a hotly debated issue, and it's still not as clear-cut as we sometimes make it out to be.
You're talking about
neighbors.
Neighbors, yeah. Yeah. You know, the essay, you know, he's writing books that are essays, but of course they're in Poland there was a lot of attempt to deny the academic status of Jan Tomasz Gross. And I think it's very mistaken because, you know, good historical essay is part of academic writing. And personally, I admire Gross' writing a lot. And particularly his last book by him, The Golden Harvest, I think it's a very interesting it's a very interesting book on the Holocaust because it shows something which is kind of neglected in the Holocaust history, which is the functional or the material aspect of it. Yeah, that much of these crimes were happening just because people wanted to get money, they wanted to loot, they wanted to rob Jewish property, and he gives evidence starting from the island of Corfu in Greece, where where local Greek peasants were robbing Jewish property when Jews were sent to Auschwitz, finishing in Lithuania, and showing how people were gaining money from Jews in Ponage. Yeah? So these were this different situation in which he shows that how they were gaining, how this was actually making money or getting some benefits from that. So the book is interesting because I don't consider it to be a book only about Poland. It's a book about a very general factor that leads to cruel behavior in times of genocide.
Okay, so the last question, maybe? Okay, so given how negative the attitude towards Israel actually is, and I was quite surprised in these results, plus given the fact how easy it is to score easy political points with casual anti-Semitism, why is that none of the Polish governments were actually anti-Israeli? And more than that, even like the pretty right-wing governments, such as the Law and Justice plus the League of Polish Feminist Government, they even had Jewish foreign ministers. Why is no one trying to play on that?
Yeah, maybe there's a sense of raison d'etat, that you think, that after this history, we shouldn't be playing with this aspect of the politics. There's some things which are unexplainable, I think, and I don't have a good explanation for that. Like the same with capital punishment. Majority of Poles is in favor of capital punishment, and it was not introduced to Polish law by many governments. Some of them, like Law and Justice, some leaders of Law and Justice were very open that there should be a capital punishment. But when they got into power, they didn't do anything with it. So luckily, that some things are not really represented in the political life, although the majority of people supports them. So you're right that many of the foreign ministers in Poland had ministers of foreign affairs had Jewish ancestry, and actually nobody really stressed that. Yes, even in times when the right-wing parties were in the government.
So is it okay for you that we just have one more question? Okay.
Well, just superficially, there is also the fact that it looks good on the outside, and governments care about what looks good on the outside, and a foreign minister of Jewish ancestry might look good on the outside too. And specifically, the Kaczynski brothers were personally, as far as I know, had former good relations with Jews in the movement, and they, it's just like the person, also the personal moral, the personal take on this subject, and maybe others too.
It's not only them; it's every single government for.
Yeah, I just have those two superficial answers. But
you're right, and I think that Lech Kaczynski certainly was not anti-Semitic. That he was really, of course, and I think Jarosław Kaczyński is he's not an anti-Semite, and the question only is that we know that politicians are hypocritical. So they are thinking different things and doing different things just to gain support. So in that respect, it's interesting. It's interesting that they don't use that, even if they know that they would gain popularity. Yeah? So they go to Radio Maria, for example, which they know is xenophobic, like one of the presidential candidates, which is now in the second round. He went to Radio Maria, he gave a long interview there, but of course he didn't say anything anti-Semitic, because still he knows that he can just show up there, and probably he would gain really some voters if he made some anti-Semitic comment there. But he didn't, which I think is nice. I mean, we should be rather happy with that situation. And I think it's a little bit against the sense that many social scientists and scholars in Poland have, that there is they use the term phantasma, which I don't know how could be translated. It's probably a French term. I don't know how it could be translated into English, but they say that there is some culturally shared sense of antisemitism in Poland, which is the basis of Polish national identity. and it's unchangeable, it's something which is very stable, and the Polish culture and the Polish national identity is built on anti-Semitism. And I'm really against this kind of standpoint, because I know that anti-Semitism is, it's very much a result of various economic processes, and I can imagine Poland being a country without anti-Semitism at some point. It's for me, it's something I could imagine, but I know that there are forces and factors that are responsible for that, and but it's not something which lies in nature of Poland, because if it really was like that, then Polish politicians would do the same as what Jobbik does in Hungary, and even Fidesz. They will use some anti-Semitic remarks and comments to gain popularity. Okay, thank you very much for coming. It was a very nice meeting, and I like very much the discussion that we had. So, thanks.
Thank you. There are more people in the store that I know than people that don't know. Yeah.
So where are you from?